I felt very emotional doing the Hurt video, yes. What have I become?
At 71 years old, Johnny Cash stood at the edge of everything. His health was failing, his voice was weaker, and the woman who had been his anchor, June Carter, was slipping away. Yet in that moment, Cash decided to sing a song that wasn't his, and somehow made it sound like it had been written for him all along. The song was Hurt, a haunting ballad about regret, addiction, and the slow crawl toward death. It was originally written by Trent Reznor of 9 Inch Nails, a man half Cash's age, from a world far removed from the country legend's Tennessee roots. Yet when Johnny Cash sat in front of the microphone, something eerie happened. The words "Everyone I know goes away in the end" no longer belonged to Reznor, they belonged to Cash, a man who had already buried his brother, his parents, and so many friends. The world heard it as a song, but for Cash, it felt like a confession, a final letter to the world, written not with pen and paper, but with a trembling voice and an old guitar. But why did this song, out of the thousands Cash had sung, leave him broken, and what secret does the video still hold, decades later? The answer is more heartbreaking than anyone imagined. Before we uncover the truth behind Johnny Cash's final, haunting masterpiece, make sure you subscribe to RetroWaves and hit the bell icon. This is where the untold stories of music's greatest icons come alive. The songs, the secrets, and the moments that changed everything. Now, let's go back to the moment when Cash chose Hurt, and why it became the song that defined his last days. Johnny Cash was no stranger to pain. From the day he lost his older brother Jack in a tragic accident at just 12 years old, the weight of grief followed him everywhere. His music carried it, his voice carried it, and his fans could feel it. By the time Cash turned 71, he had lived through battles most men wouldn't survive. Years of addiction had left scars, both on his body and on his relationships. He had been to the top of the charts and the bottom of hospital beds, and yet, every time, he stood back up. That's why the world saw him as indestructible, the man in black, a legend who always found a way forward. But in the early 2000s, everything began to change. His health was collapsing. He had been diagnosed with autonomic neuropathy, a condition that left him weak and vulnerable. His eyesight was failing. The endless tours and recordings were becoming a struggle, and the love of his life, June Carter Cash, was also fading before his eyes. At that stage, most singers would have walked away quietly, retired in peace. But Johnny Cash did something unexpected. He picked up a song that no one thought suited him, a raw industrial rock ballad by 9 Inch Nails. On paper, it made no sense. Cash was country, gospel, folk. Reznor was the sound of pain from a different generation. So why did Cash choose this song? Why, at the very end, did he decide that the world needed to hear his voice through Hurt? The answer begins with a man half his age and a song that wasn't meant for him. In 1994, nearly a decade before Johnny Cash would record it, Hurt was released by 9 Inch Nails. The song was written by Trent Reznor, a man drowning in his own demons. For him, Hurt was about addiction, self-destruction, and the terrifying thought of wasting a life. Reznor's version was cold, industrial, almost mechanical. It came from the world of alternative rock, far removed from Cash's world of hymns, ballads, and country storytelling. But beneath the layers of distortion and noise, there was something timeless in its message, the ache of regret and the fear of being left alone. When Reznor first performed it, he wasn't trying to reach across generations. He wasn't writing for a country legend or for anyone outside his circle. He was writing for himself, to survive his own despair. Yet that raw honesty gave Hurt a strange power. It didn't matter where you came from. The song hit like a mirror, and somehow, in that mirror, Johnny Cash saw himself. Cash had known addiction. He had fought through it for decades, fueled by pills that nearly ended his career. He had known despair, the loneliness of hotel rooms, the collapse of marriages, the shadow of his own mistakes. It was all there, hiding under the fame. So when Cash heard Hurt, it wasn't just another song. It was like Reznor had written down everything Cash had lived through without ever meeting him. But when the idea was first suggested that Johnny Cash might cover Hurt, even Reznor himself had doubts. Could the man in black really make this song his own? Or would it feel like a strange mismatch between two worlds that were never meant to collide? The answer would shock everyone, including Reznor himself. The idea for Johnny Cash to cover Hurt didn't come out of nowhere. It came from producer Rick Rubin, the man who had already reinvented Cash's career in the 1990s. Rubin had stripped away the polished Nashville sound and pushed Cash into something raw, intimate, and haunting. When Rubin suggested Hurt, Cash didn't hesitate. He read the lyrics and saw his own life reflected back. Addiction, regret, the endless tally of people he had lost. In those words, he felt the weight of 71 years pressed down into 3 minutes of music. But when Trent Reznor found out that Cash was recording his song, his first reaction wasn't excitement, it was disbelief.
It didn't sound right to me. That was my song, and it didn't sound bad, it just sounded something wrong. It sounded...
Reznor later admitted he was nervous. To him, Hurt was personal, a wound on paper. How could a country legend, someone so far removed from his own world, possibly capture its meaning? He feared it would sound forced, maybe even disrespectful. Then the recording arrived. Cash's version wasn't drenched in distortion. It was stripped bare. Just an old man's trembling voice, an acoustic guitar, and silence that seemed to echo louder than any instrument. Suddenly, Reznor's song didn't sound like a cry from the 1990s. It sounded eternal. Reznor recalled listening to Cash's recording and feeling chills. It was still his song on paper, but it no longer belonged to him. As he said in one interview, "That song isn't mine anymore." But the true power of Cash's Hurt wouldn't be revealed until the video. And when the cameras rolled inside Johnny Cash's Tennessee home, the world witnessed something that felt less like a music video and more like a farewell. When director Mark Romanek agreed to film the video for Johnny Cash's Hurt, he knew it couldn't be just another performance clip. Cash was 71. His health was visibly declining, and there was no point in pretending otherwise. So Romanek leaned into the truth, and what he captured would become one of the most haunting music videos ever made. The video was shot in Cash's own home in Hendersonville, Tennessee. Once a proud mansion, it was now falling into decay. Dust clung to the furniture, relics of the past sat unused, and the house itself seemed to echo with ghosts. It was the perfect mirror for Cash himself, once larger than life, now fragile, but still filled with history. As the song plays, images cut between Cash at the piano and clips from his younger days. A man in his prime, full of energy, fire, and strength. The contrast is painful. You see the legend he once was, side by side with the man he had become. Perhaps the most devastating moment comes when Cash sings the line, "Everyone I know goes away in the end."
Everyone I know goes away.
His voice quivers. His eyes, cloudy and tired, look not at the camera, but into some private place of memory and loss. For fans, it felt like he was speaking directly to them, admitting for the first time that the end was near. When the video was released in 2003, it stunned the world. Music critics called it the most powerful video ever made. Even casual viewers who didn't know much about Cash felt its weight. This wasn't just a performance, it was a goodbye. But what made the video even more heartbreaking was the timing, because just months later, everything would change forever. Johnny Cash's life was never lived alone. Through the chaos of addiction, the rise of fame, and the shadow of failure, one person had remained by his side, June Carter Cash. She wasn't just his wife. She was his anchor, his partner on stage, and his savior off it. When Johnny's demons nearly destroyed him in the late 1960s, it was June who refused to let him go. She prayed for him, stayed with him through withdrawal, and gave him something he had long forgotten, a reason to fight. He often said that without June, he wouldn't have survived. That's why her presence in the Hurt video carries so much weight. She appears only briefly, but in that moment, she doesn't need words. She looks at him with an expression that fans described as both love and sorrow, as though she understood that this song wasn't just a performance, it was his farewell. To anyone who knew their story, that single glance spoke volumes. June was the witness to Johnny's confessions, the silent keeper of his truth. And when she passed away just 3 months after filming, her appearance in the video became almost unbearable to watch. Viewers now see her as a ghost within the frame, standing by Johnny as she always had, but also preparing to leave him. The grief of that realization adds a layer of meaning that words can't capture, and for Johnny, the loss of June so soon after singing Hurt was like the last string snapping. The song became not only his confession, but also their shared goodbye. But what did the world see when this video was released? Was it recognized as the masterpiece it would later be? Or did people first resist the idea of a country legend singing about pain in someone else's words? When the video for Hurt premiered in early 2003, it spread quickly, but not in the way most music videos did at the time. This wasn't MTV glitter or radio-friendly flash. It was stark, quiet, brutally honest. Critics didn't know what to make of it at first. Some called it the saddest music video ever created. Others called it the most powerful farewell in music history. The Guardian praised it as a masterclass in mortality. Rolling Stone said it was like watching a man sing from the edge of the grave. But perhaps the most surprising reaction came from younger fans, people who had grown up with 9 Inch Nails and who had never listened to Johnny Cash before. They were stunned. To them, Cash wasn't a country star. He wasn't part of the Nashville sound their parents listened to. He was something else entirely, a living embodiment of pain and honesty. Older fans, meanwhile, saw something different. They remembered the Johnny Cash of the 1950s and 60s, the rebel who sang at Folsom Prison, the man who defied Nashville rules. To them, Hurt was heartbreaking because it showed just how far their hero had come. He was no longer the strong, booming figure in black. He was fragile, tired, and facing the end with no mask. The reaction was universal, silence followed by tears. People didn't just hear the song, they felt it. And soon it became clear that this was more than a cover. It was a cultural moment, a bridge between generations. But perhaps no reaction was more powerful than that of Trent Reznor, the man who had written the song in the first place. And when he saw what Cash had done with it, his world shifted. Trent Reznor's version of Hurt had always been personal. It was his cry from the bottom of addiction, written in his darkest years. To him, the song was about needles, despair, and the feeling of wasting a life. But Johnny Cash's version sounded different. It wasn't the cry of a man in the middle of addiction. It was the confession of a man at the end of life. Lines that once carried one meaning suddenly carried another. When Cash sang, "I will let you down, I will make you hurt," it didn't sound like a junkie's admission. It sounded like a husband speaking to his wife, or a father speaking to his children, reflecting on mistakes that could never be undone. When he whispered, "You could have it all, my empire of dirt," it was no longer about industrial alienation. It was about Johnny Cash himself, a man who had stood at the top of the charts, toured the world and lived in luxury, yet now looked around his crumbling mansion and realized how little it all meant. And then came the most devastating line, "Everyone I know goes away in the end." For Reznor, that lyric was about fear. For Cash, it was about reality. His parents were gone, his brother was gone, his friends and bandmates were gone, and soon, June would be gone too. This was not performance, it was confession. It was Johnny Cash laying his life bare for the world. That's why so many people say the song left him broken. Because in those words, Cash wasn't just singing, he was admitting his regrets, his losses, and his helplessness in the face of time. But how did Trent Reznor respond? Seeing his own song transformed into something so final, his reaction revealed just how much power Cash's version carried. When Trent Reznor first heard about Johnny Cash covering Hurt, he was skeptical. He worried it might feel forced, maybe even wrong. After all, Cash came from a completely different world. How could he possibly understand what the song meant? Then Reznor saw the video. He later admitted that watching it left him shaken. In his own words, he felt like he had lost ownership of the song. "That song isn't mine anymore," he said. "It belongs to Johnny Cash." For Reznor, it was bittersweet. On one hand, his music had reached further than he ever imagined. On the other, he felt like Cash had closed the book on Hurt. There was nothing more he could add. The song had found its final voice. And in a way, the entire world agreed. Cash's Hurt is now remembered not as a cover, but as a definitive performance. It is taught in schools, analyzed by critics, and considered one of the greatest music videos ever made. But for Johnny Cash himself, Hurt was never about accolades. It wasn't about Grammys or headlines. It was about telling the truth before time ran out. And by the time the world realized what he had given them, it was almost too late. The final scenes of Hurt are some of the most unforgettable moments in music history. The camera lingers on Johnny Cash's frail hands as they press the piano keys. His voice trembles, but it does not break. He is holding on, note by note, to finish what he began. And then, almost without warning, the music fades. Cash lowers the piano lid with shaky fingers. The sound of it closing feels heavier than the final chord. It is as if he is shutting the door on his own life. This was no ordinary performance. This was a farewell. In those seconds, the silence becomes deafening. The video cuts between Johnny's weary face and images of his younger self. Strong, vibrant, full of life. The contrast is unbearable. The message is clear. Time spares no one, not even legends. June Carter stands in the background watching. Her eyes are quiet, her expression unreadable. But viewers later said it was the look of a woman who knew the end was near. 3 months later, June would pass away. 4 months after her, Johnny would follow. The video that once looked like a confession became a prophecy. For fans, it was almost too much. Some said they couldn't watch it without crying. Others said they felt like intruders, as if they had been allowed to witness something private, something that should have remained between Johnny and June. And yet, Johnny gave it to the world. Why? Because he wanted us to see him not as a myth, not as the man in black, but as a man facing the final truth of life, that no matter how far we run, time always catches us. So what does hurt mean now, more than 20 years later? For Trent Reznor, it was a song of addiction and despair. For Johnny Cash, it became something else entirely, a song about life itself. It wasn't only about drugs. It wasn't only about regret. It was about everything we leave behind, and how little it matters compared to the people we love. When Johnny sang My Empire of Dirt, he was speaking to all of us. He had won every award, sold millions of records, performed for packed arenas, and yet standing in his crumbling house, none of it could save him from the reality of death. All the fame in the world could not stop the silence that was coming. But in that silence, Cash gave us a gift. He gave us honesty. Most artists spend their careers building myths, polishing their image, hiding their scars. Johnny Cash did the opposite. In Hurt, he tore down the walls and let us see the man behind the legend. That is why the song still resonates today. It tells us the truth we often avoid, that even the strongest fall, even the greatest fade, and even legends say goodbye. Yet there is something strangely comforting about it. Because if Johnny Cash, a man who had lived through hell and come out the other side, could face death with honesty, maybe we can too. Hurt is not just a sad song, it is a lesson, a reminder that no matter how much pain we carry, there is still dignity in truth. And that may be why people still watch the video today, millions of times over, searching not just for music, but for meaning. And so we are left with one image, Johnny Cash, at 71 years old, closing the piano, his voice gone, his body failing, but his spirit still unbroken. Was it his last confession, his last gift? Or was it simply the truth he had been waiting his whole life to tell? That answer is something only Johnny knew. But one thing is certain, Hurt is no longer just a song. It is his legacy, his letter to the world, and the reason fans still feel his presence every time those words echo. So I'll leave you with this question. When you hear Johnny Cash whisper, "I will let you down, I will make you hurt," do you hear a song, or do you hear a man telling you his final truth? Tell me in the comments what you felt the first time you saw that video, and if you want more untold stories about the songs that changed music forever, the heartbreaks, the secrets, and the goodbyes that still echo today, make sure you subscribe to RetroWaves. Because the stories don't end when the music stops. Sometimes that's when they begin.